Hi everyone. Let's spend a few moments and talk about Michael Porter's work as it relates to value chain analysis. We'll also cover the work of others as well. Okay, Michael Porter by some is considered to be the father of management strategy, or the father of strategy. And he wrote in one of his textbooks in, I believe, chapter 3, about a concept that was introduced for the first time called value chain. And we'll focus a little bit on Porter's 5 forces and then how it relates to value chain analysis. Oh, and I see I have a typo. That should say value chain analysis. Okay, Porter's work is all about positioning. And positioning is the oldest approach used by military strategists. It focuses on how firms in a given context will differ in how they present their products and services to the market. So the concern is how they position themselves in their products with regard to the positioning of the competitive services and products. Okay, so there's some premises on the positioning approach. One premise is that strategy follows structure. Now, strategy is the idea or the concern in business of what should we be doing rather than how well or how efficient we're doing. It's concerned more with the long-term direction and focus of what the business ought to be doing. Okay, so another premise of the positioning approach is that it looks at the groups of competitors in the industry and it relies more heavily on calculations rather than the design. Okay, and it places even more emphasis on the role of strategic planners. Okay, now Porter talked quite a bit about the 5 forces. Okay, the first one is threat of entry, and let's talk about that for a while. Porter described a number of barriers to entry that has an impact on the 5 forces impacting a firm. Okay, some of the barriers to entry, and this would be barriers of new competitors, would be economies of scale, product differentiation, capital requirements, cost disadvantages that are independent of size. When we're talking about size, we're talking about economies of scale. Access to distribution channels and government policy. So Porter identified all of these barriers as ways that impact who competes with a given firm. Okay, then he talked about the power of buyers, and he said they have various powers. They have bargaining leverage and may be impacted by concentration, the volume of buying, so buyer volume is a power of buyers. The relative cost of switching from one buyer to another is another power of buyers that Porter pointed out. He pointed out there is an ability to integrate backward. There are, in many cases, substitute products and how well those products serve as substitutes for a given product. And then there's the concept of pull-through that he also identified. Okay, now when we talk about the power of suppliers, Porter indicated that there are supplier power determinants. Differentiation of inputs is one, switching costs of the suppliers, the presence of substitute products, supplier concentration. All of these are factors in how powerful or what lack of power various suppliers have in a given industry that impacts a particular firm and its particular position. Okay, some others were importance of volume to supplier, the cost relative to total purchases in the relationship, and the impact of inputs on cost or differentiation. Okay, when we talk about the power of substitutes, what Porter discussed was one concern may revolve around the relative price performance of a substitute. How good of a substitute is it? what are the switching costs involved in going from one substitute to another, and what's the buyer's propensity, and you can think of that as being likeliness of substituting. Okay, and then finally the fifth area that Porter talked about was competitive rivalry. Let me switch back 1 second here. And competitive rivalry really is the impact of how competitive are the various firms currently in existence and those that want to get involved. And I don't have any bullet points that goes into that with much more detail. Okay, well, with the framework of Porter's 5 forces, you see it's sort of an industry focus that leads you to think about what are the external forces on a given company, and can it evaluate those forces to determine where it should be and where it should go to next. Again, the whole emphasis on positioning. Now within this, he then brought up the topic of value chain analysis. Okay, now I'd like to point out there really are 2 value chains. There's the internal or firm value chain, which is the value creating activities within the firm. And this right here should say internal value chain. And then there's the industry value chain, which is the value creating activities within the entire industry. Okay, well, let's concentrate on the internal value chain. Porter went on to say there are primary activities that a firm is involved with. It's involved with inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, and service. And he identified these. And how well we do these has an impact on the margin of the business, as well as the positioning in the firm and other traits of the industry itself. But his point in the value chain analysis is from an internal focus. We need to think about these various activities that we're involved in and use them as a basis for analysis to see if we can drive higher margin, higher profits, and higher returns for the stakeholders. Okay, and then Porter went on to talk about that firms have support activities as well, and he identified procurement, human resource management, technology development, and the last one I believe should be administration. I think it just didn't get copied in correct. So this would be, think of the last one as administration and infrastructure. Now the important point is not that he came up with these 3 or 4 support activities. We could probably break these down in a variety of ways. But the important point of Porter's work on value chain analysis is that a firm has primary activities involved in what they do, whether they sell a product or provide a service, and there are support activities that go along with them, and all of them are fair game to take a look at to see which ones can we do better, which ones should we de-emphasize, which ones are subject to outsourcing or even relatively new ideas like using software as a service or relying on consultants. All of these sort of decisions are based on Porter's work of looking at your business as a series of value-added activities that occur within the firm. Okay? So the significance is that it provides a framework for identifying or developing a distinctive competence. So we're back to the idea of positioning. And that's what I wanted to cover on Porter's work in terms of the 5 forces, and also just a brief introduction of what value chain concepts are all about. Okay? If you wanted to see more, the citations I've listed appear in front of you. Thanks, everyone.